Alan Wake had faced his fair share of nightmares, both in the waking world and the world of his own creation. But nothing could have prepared him for what awaited him on the shores of Carnate Island. It had been years since he had last seen the typewriter, years since he had written himself out of the dark place. But now, he found himself drawn back into a world of shadows and uncertainty. The ferry had dropped him off at the decrepit docks of Carnate Island, and as he stepped onto the rickety wooden planks, he couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding. The island seemed to ooze with a malevolent energy, and the very air was thick with the stench of decay. He had come here in search of inspiration, hoping that the isolated island would provide the solitude he needed to finally finish his latest novel. But as he made his way through the abandoned streets of the island's only town, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. The buildings loomed over him like ancient sentinels, their windows boarded up and the doors locked tight. It was as if the entire town had been abandoned overnight, leaving behind only the echoes of its former residents. Alan's footsteps echoed through the empty streets, and the sound sent a shiver down his spine. As he walked deeper into the heart of the town, he became aware of a strange sensation, a heaviness in the air that seemed to press down on him from all sides. He glanced up at the darkening sky, but there was no sign of a storm. Yet, the oppressive atmosphere only grew stronger with each step he took. He reached a crossroads in the town, and there, he saw it, a flicker of movement in the shadows. It was quick, almost imperceptible, but it was enough to send a jolt of fear through him. He had faced his own creations come to life before, but this felt different, more sinister. Alan's heart pounded in his chest as he followed the movement into an alleyway. He was met with a sight that made his blood run cold, a grotesque creature, part man and part something else entirely, lurking in the darkness. The creature turned to face him, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. It let out a guttural growl, and in that moment, Alan realized that he was not alone on this island. Whatever darkness had taken hold of Carnate Island, it was real, and it was dangerous. Meanwhile, on the other side of Carnate Island, a man named Talk was locked in a never-ending nightmare. He had been sentenced to death row for a crime he couldn't remember committing, and the nightmares that plagued him in the dark confines of Abbott State Penitentiary were a constant torment. Talk's mind was a jumble of fragmented memories, and he couldn't distinguish between the real and the imagined. The shadows in his cell whispered to him, taunting him with half-formed visions of his past. But one thing was clear: his guilt or innocence didn't matter anymore. He was trapped in a living nightmare, and there was no way out. As he lay on his narrow cot, Talk's thoughts drifted back to the day it had all begun, the day he had arrived on Carnate Island. He had been a prisoner, shackled and restrained, when the ferry had brought him to the island's foreboding shores. The island had seemed like a place out of time, a place where the darkness itself held sway. The other prisoners on the ferry had been just as bewildered and terrified as Talk, and the guards had been on edge, their rifles trained on the prisoners at all times. It was as if they knew that something was waiting for them on the island, something that defied explanation. As Talk had stepped onto the island, he had felt a strange sense of déjà vu, as if he had been here before, in another life. But the memories were elusive, like smoke slipping through his fingers. The days and nights on Carnate Island had blurred together, a never-ending cycle of torment and fear. Talk had encountered bizarre creatures that seemed to be born from the very shadows themselves, and he had fought for his life with every step he took. But one thing had remained constant: the feeling that he was being watched, that there was something lurking in the darkness, something that wanted him dead. As Alan and Talk's paths drew closer, they each felt an inexplicable pull, as if their fates were intertwined. Alan had heard rumors of a man on the island, a man who had been condemned to death row for a crime he couldn't remember committing. It seemed like a story straight out of one of his own novels, but he couldn't ignore the feeling that there was more to it than met the eye. Talk, on the other hand, had heard whispers of a writer who had arrived on the island, a writer who seemed to have brought the darkness with him. It was said that the shadows themselves obeyed his commands, and that he held the key to escaping the island's nightmarish grip. One fateful night, Alan stumbled upon the remains of a prison, a place that seemed to have been swallowed by the darkness. As he explored the eerie, decrepit building, he came across a cell with a nameplate that sent a shock of recognition through him: Talk. Inside the cell, he found a tattered journal, filled with the ramblings of a man trapped in a never-ending nightmare. The journal spoke of a crime that Talk couldn't remember committing, of a darkness that consumed him from within. Alan couldn't explain why, but he felt a kinship with the man whose words he held in his hands. It was as if their stories were intertwined, two sides of the same dark tale. Meanwhile, Talk's own nightmares had taken a new turn. He had begun to see visions of a writer, a man who seemed to hold the key to his salvation. The writer's words echoed in his mind, guiding him through the labyrinthine horrors of the island. It was during one of these visions that Talk and Alan's paths finally crossed. In the depths of the island's darkness, they found themselves face to face, two men bound by their own personal demons. The meeting between Alan Wake and Talk was fraught with tension. Both men were haunted by their pasts, both men were trapped in a nightmare that seemed impossible to escape, and both men held the key to each other's salvation. Talk had been living in fear and confusion for so long that he didn't know who to trust anymore. But there was something about Alan, something in the way he spoke and the look in his eyes, that made Talk believe that he might be the key to unlocking the secrets of his past. Alan, on the other hand, saw in Talk a man who had been unjustly condemned, a man whose own struggle with darkness mirrored his own. He believed that together, they could find a way to confront the malevolent force that had taken hold of Carnate Island. As they joined forces, they discovered that the darkness on the island was not just a metaphorical one but a very real and tangible entity. It was a force that fed on fear and despair, a force that had the power to shape reality itself. It had taken hold of the island's inhabitants, twisting them into monstrous abominations. Together, Alan and Talk fought their way through the horrors of the island, using their unique abilities to combat the darkness. Alan's ability to manipulate light became a powerful weapon against the shadows, while Talk's inner demons manifested as a physical force that he could use to his advantage. As Alan and Talk delved deeper into the heart of the island, they uncovered the truth about its dark history. The island had been a place of suffering and torment for centuries, a place where the darkest aspects of humanity had been imprisoned and left to fester. The malevolent force that had taken hold of the island was a manifestation of all that pain and suffering, a force that sought to break free and spread its darkness to the world beyond. It had chosen Talk as its vessel, using his own guilt and inner demons to fuel its power. But Alan and Talk were determined not to let the darkness win. They had faced their own demons and come out stronger on the other side, and now they would face the ultimate test of their strength. In a climactic showdown, Alan and Talk confronted the embodiment of the darkness, a grotesque and monstrous creature that seemed to defy reality itself. It was a battle of light against shadow, of redemption against despair. As the battle raged on, Alan and Talk tapped into the deepest reserves of their strength and determination. They used their abilities in tandem, creating a dazzling display of light and darkness that illuminated the entire island. In the end, it was the power of their combined wills that triumphed over the darkness. The creature let out a deafening roar as it was consumed by the blinding light, and with one final burst of energy, it was vanquished. With the darkness defeated, the island began to change. The shadows that had once consumed it began to recede, and the air was filled with a sense of hope and renewal. For Talk, the nightmare was finally over. He had faced his past and come to terms with his guilt, and now he was free to leave the island behind. With a heavy heart, he said his farewells to Alan, knowing that their paths would likely never cross again. Alan, too, found closure on Carnate Island. He had faced the darkness both within himself and in the world around him, and he had emerged stronger for it. As he stood on the ferry, watching the island disappear into the distance, He couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude for the strange and unexpected journey he had undertaken. As the ferry sailed away from Carnate Island, Alan couldn't help but wonder about the mysteries of the world, the thin line between reality and fiction, and the power of the human spirit to overcome even the darkest of nightmares. And so, the story of Alan Wake and Talk came to a close, two men brought together by fate and bound by their shared struggle against the shadows. They had faced their own demons and emerged victorious, proving that even in the darkest of times, there was always a glimmer of light to guide the way.